Hello, everybody. Welcome to this County Seat Extended Conversation. We are talking about issues of the West, and today we are going to focus on wildlife. Now, any of you who are sportsmen who've gone to the Hunt Expo, you probably already know the name Don Peay, and he is the person we've tapped to give us some background on wildlife habitat restoration and the status of wildlife here in the state of Utah. Don, thank you so much for taking the time.
Chad, thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's talk for just a minute about the history of your foundation, the Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. It has been a game changer, and people in state government, in DW, everybody will acknowledge this has really made a difference. So give us a little history about it.
Yeah, I mean, Chad, I grew up like most kids in Utah. We were out of school for 2 days for the deer hunt. And I mean, it wasn't Christmas, it wasn't BYU football, it was the deer hunt. Mm-hmm. And then the opening day of fishing season. Well, all that kind of went away because of a lot of reasons. The environmentalists came in and stopped active land use management. The state wildlife resources said, oh, the future isn't hunting and fishing, it's spotted owls and desert tortoises. So they kind of raided all the hunting and fishing license money and diverted them. And so they let the fish hatcheries fall apart, they let the deer habitat go. We started having predators, and so the deer herds crashed. And at that time, Chad, we had another key thing to understand is there's probably only about 10,000 elk in the state of Utah at that time.
Wow.
And I understand this very intimately because both of my families were ranchers. And they both got put out of business by the Forest Service. And the Forest Service used part of that weapon, there was a few more elk. Instead of addressing the root cause, oh, we're not treating our lands and making more grass. And so they cut a lot of grazing permits, put ranchers out of business, and they blamed it on elk. So there literally, Chad, were fistfights at the public meetings between ranchers and sportsmen back in the mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And so back to the main point, our deer herds were crashing. The cattlemen wanted to kill all the elk. We had no bighorn, no desert bighorn, no moose, no mountain goats, no bison, and no wild turkey. And so the Salt Lake Tribune had this big article, hunting is doomed in Utah.
Wow. Well, it's not.
Everything's driven by politicians. Sportsmen don't like politics.
Yeah, they'd rather hunt than
They'd rather hunt, be in the
protest.
woods. But guess what? If you want to have good hunting, you got to at least go vote.
Right.
And you got to let the politicians know that how they vote on fishing and hunting matters. And so that's how we became the kingmaker. And then that evolved, as you know, Chad, clear to the, I gave Donald Trump Jr. the idea to go after the hunter vote in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. That's why Trump won. I actually gave Mitt Romney that strategy and connected him with some of the biggest names in NASCAR, country music, etc. But I guess I didn't go to Harvard like Mitt, so they didn't listen and they lost, but then Trump's won.
Well, you're for a guy that's a politician or a permanent bend politician's ears, you're pretty straightforward, aren't you?
Well, that's why the people in government that like to fix things love me. Mm-hmm. The politicians hate me, and it's probably mutual because the sportsmen have voted a lot of these jokers out.
Well, tell me exactly how the foundation started.
Well, you have to go 3 years sooner. I started the Utah Wild Sheep Foundation.
Right.
And we raised $12,000, and we went out and did a domestic sheep buyout up on the North Slope with Uintas, and we put some bighorns there that came in from Wyoming, and they went to Hoop Lake. So now that Hoop Lake, Flaming Gorge, that's where that started. I worked out a win-win deal with the ranchers, the Lyman Grazing Association, and the deal was $36,000, paid over 3 years. So we'd raised 12. But I knew if we could get hunters, actually, a lot of these groups were around, they didn't do anything, they had parties, So the first year we raised 12, we raised 80 the next year, 150 the next year. And so with Utah Wild Sheep, they were actually seeing results. So then we had the Capitol Rally and started Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. And that's where that group started. And then, at some point we'll go over all the great things that have happened. But that group of sportsmen and SFW, from the Byron Batemans and Gary Lewis's and Scott Bonansky of Price and Nolan Gardner's of St. George, James Gilson. I mean, there's just a group of guys that, said, hey, this is our country, this is our state. If we want to get involved, we can fix it. And they did. And of course, that's where I met a guy named Mike Saparis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And how did that work out?
Well, Mike is this kid that grew up in Price, loved to hunt, came to Salt Lake, built a pretty good company, and I just had this shoebox full of money at the Capitol Rally, and Mike come up and says, hey, I've got this database, I can create all the membership, and I said, here, take this pile of money, we'll get caught up in a couple weeks. And so he just could see that I was serious and that he could be trustworthy. Mike was on the board. The other really cool thing, Chad, let's skip forward. And I love to give metrics. And of course, someone's going to watch this and they're going to argue, well, Don, there was a little teeny herd of bison before this. There was. But there were also bighorn sheep that would have all died. I mean, we can go into the nuances, but here's the basic story. Hunting and fishing, according to the Tribune, Tom Wharton, good guy, a dying $500 million industry. They used to sell 200,000 deer tags. After that winter and the bad hunt, they couldn't sell 100,000 deer tags. Only 20,000 hunters applied for our tags.
Wow.
There was only about 600 really good limited entry tags. So where are we today, 30 years later? We have about 5,000 really good tags. The media said hunting was a dying sport. Well, we have over 500,000 hunters applying for our hunts. So we went from 20,000 in 1994 to 500,000. Simple. If you build it, they'll come.
Yeah, so, and that gets to the very point. You took this money from the foundation to build habitat, and that was the primary purpose of the foundation, right? Was to fix the habitat and create more wildlife.
Yeah, in simplistic terms, it was to form a partnership with State Wildlife Resources, and we had to teach some people in the government to say can do and will do, and we'll find the money instead of can't do, never can. So, I went up to the Capitol and met some friendly legislators, and we started changing. I think there's been 13 laws changed. The division budget was $22 million, and they cut it $3 million. The cattlemen wanted everything gone. The environmentalists were here. I mean, it was chaos in '93. Now, I think the budget's $100 million a year. And I actually met with President Bush in the White House, and there was a piece of legislation passed called the Healthy Forest Initiative. No other states did anything, but we came back here, and me and some Fish and Game guys said, hey, Kevin Conway gets a lot of credit. I've got a picture with me and Kevin Conway, Mike Styler, Leonard Blackham, and a commissioner from Beaver. We went to D.C., and they started this watershed restoration. And we used to do 2,000 acres a year. Now we do 150,000 acres a year. So that's almost 2 million acres of habitat. So now we got more food. The next thing we did, Chad, is we had to do a lot of transplants. And so I think there's been more than 67 desert bighorn transplants. You bring them in from Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico.
Do the environmentalists go crazy with it because they're saying, well, that's the Colorado bighorn, it can't be the Utah bighorn?
Well, and so you hung me a curveball, Chad, so I'm gonna go deep. I think there's probably been 17 mountain goat transplants and many moose and bison. And so the environmentalists, they're anti-hunters.
Yeah.
So the environmentalists love us. I mean, I've done deals with the Nature Conservancy, the real environmentalists. But the anti-hunters that mask themselves, when we put the mountain goats up on Timpanogos, interesting backstory, because it was wilderness, we couldn't just helicopter the goats in. We had to capture the goats, dart them, put them on ice on panniers, haul them down out of the wilderness boundary, then helicopter them. I mean, it was stupidity. And one of the anti-hunting groups said, oh, well, the general public hates to see these noxious weeds. They're not part of the ecosystem. So I did a little survey up there one day. I just hiked up Timp and, they see the beautiful goats. I'm like, so are these noxious weeds? Oh, no, this makes the trip. I mean, it's a cool thing. And so what I found, Chad, is that these anti-hunting groups, the radical environmental groups, they're none of that. They do nothing for wildlife. They're purely anti-hunting. And sportsmen, we've kicked their ass on about 100 times, and we'll do it another 100 times.
So there's some people in the hunting, I think one thing that we probably want to inform people about on the foundation is that all this money, the auctions, the tags, It all goes back to improve the habitat, and this was, in my understanding, was a lot of the money it took to make hunting a better sport here in Utah. But the local Joe hunter goes, oh yeah, they give the limited entry, those really good tags, and I can't afford $40,000 or $50,000. But what happens to that money that the foundation raises?
Well, let me answer it this way, Chad. If you had $100,000, and I said, Chad, if you'll give me $5,000 a year for the next 5 years, you'll have $5 million. Would you do that?
You bet.
So that's what we did, Chad. There was no money, and the division didn't have any money. The legislature wouldn't give them any money, so we came up with this auction idea. And that auction program now has generated about $47 million. When you match that with state and federal money that we came up and said, hey, Governor, we just raised $3 million from these tags. Can we get $3 million of sales tax from Cabela's and sports? Well, of course. And then you go, Orrin Hatch went and said, can we get, $8 million federal? So here's what's really happened, Chad. We're spending $25 million a year to fix habitat. Every time you do a goat transplant, a sheep transplant, a moose transplant, etc., it costs a lot of money. Probably $250,000 a shot. So we've transplanted, like I said, there's probably been 65 bighorn, desert bighorn transplants, 15 goat transplants, 5 or 6 moose transplants. And I want to give a plug right here. The average sportsman, they don't realize what our Division Wildlife Resource guys do. I was going up to East Canyon for a moose capture, and I seen ambulances going, and my heart sunk. And I got up there, and I seen the rotor of a helicopter in the power lines, and I knew what had happened.
Oh dear.
There were 3 division employees killed probably 15, 20 years ago. They're out capturing moose, and it was a low visibility day, and they hit a power line that killed. So, these Division Wildlife Resource guys, they don't get paid a lot. All they hear is the negativity from a lot of sportsmen. But those of us who work with them, we have tremendous amount of respect. They've done amazing. And so it takes teamwork. It takes private sportsmen getting involved. It takes a great state employees. It takes some federal agencies because it's 67% federal land. And then we've kind of been that little cog in the middle, Chad, of making all this stuff work. And Mike Levitt once said, he said, Don, you figured out what a lot of people don't. He says, you're this little teeny cog that turns all these really big cogs. And so that's what I figured out, but then we got a great team of guys and women. So the reality is 5,000 people make the world go around in the Utah hunting, and 95,000 get the benefit.
We're going to take a commercial break. We're going to come back in just a minute. We will talk a little bit about Hunt Expo and its parallel journey with your foundation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our conversation. Issue of the day, we're talking about wildlife habitat and wildlife restoration, bringing the game animals back to Utah. The guy that's behind all this, that's been moving and shaking, is Don Peay. Don, we've talked a little bit about the foundation and how it got started and what some of its hallmarks are, but there's this parallel track, and sometimes people get the two of them confused. I want to talk a little bit about the Hunt Expo and how that, put this wildlife issue on center stage, because it has.
Yeah, and that was kind of always what I wanted to do. But let me just say, first and foremost, the Mule Deer Foundation and Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife have been running the Hunt Expo for like 15 years, and it's an amazing show.
Right.
More than 65,000 people from 32 countries now. We roll the governor in, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate. I mean, everyone's like, wow, it's actually bigger than Sundance Film. It's bigger than outdoor retailers. We just don't get any press.
Yeah,
we don't care.
Why do you think that is, Peay?
Because we don't try to get it. I mean, the people that matter know, and they know how big of economic. It's a $100 million weekend for the state, but it's made it really easy also to bring in big national names like Ryan Zinke, Dick Cheney, the big names, and that's how you influence or change federal land policy, and that's where most of us hunt's federal land. So. Back in the genesis, I was on, at a pretty young age, the Wild Sheep Foundation board, a big national group. And, there was Safari Club, the Sheep Foundation, the Elk Foundation, and I'm like, why don't we all just come together in one place? It would be more efficient for the outfitters and the guides, and we're just spending a lot of money on hotels and airline tickets. Let's put it into conservation. And so I came up with this idea, and I said, let's bring in the Mule Deer Foundation, the Elk Foundation, the Turkey Federation, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, and the Sheep Foundation. They all had a 20% equity stake, a gift. And the whole key, Chad, is we had created now all these incredible elk, deer, sheep, moose, goat experiences. Huge, long list to get in. And so I said to Governor Huntsman, I said, Governor, let's take 200 of these tags, and it'll anchor in this amazing expo. And you had to come to this place. Well, I think it was 1985, the Elk Foundation's fundraiser in Salt Lake was terrible. It was not well attended. There's a lot of reasons why, but so the Elk Foundation and the Turkey Federation didn't want to be a part of it. Candidly, they said, we're the Clydesdales and you guys are the Shetland ponies. And
Wow.
So they left, and that's great. I'm glad they did. They walked away from the biggest show there is. Then the Sheep Foundation was here for 3 years, and then they decided they just wanted to do their thing, and they're back in Reno doing awesome. So now it's the two groups. It's the biggest show in the world. A lot of guys, even from like Africa, Tanzania, Botswana, they say they book more elephant and lion hunts in Salt Lake than they do at the big international show.
Oh.
So people from around the world do awesome here. It's made it, it's made it a great thing to be able to go to our state legislature, our governor, say, hey, we need some more funding for more wildlife. And it's become, kind of Christmas for 65,000 people. The other key thing we really wanted, Chad, is we said, okay, we're going to have, these, the 200 draw tags. Mm-hmm. We have some auction tags. We said we'll have some fun entertainment. But then what happened is the exhibitors came, and now literally, I think there's a waiting line of a lot of people want to get in. It's the entire Salt Palace booked out.
It's a huge, huge event.
So it's a huge event. And so it's kind of it's been an awesome thing, and I have always had big ideas, but I think this has actually gotten a little bigger than what I thought it might do.
Well, so what kind of power does that bring to improving hunting, not only here but across the West? What does the Hunt Expo bring to the table as far as the actual game on the ground, so to speak?
Well, it's huge. I mean, and so what people don't understand is if the head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really has a predominant position in global wildlife management and hunting. Mm-hmm. So, Greg Sheehan, who's another great state employee, mm-hmm. Donald Trump came out here, Donald Trump Jr., ran Zinke, connect the dots, Trump gets elected, and then Greg Sheehan's head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And one of the big things he did is he got wolves off the endangered species list, but he also coordinated, a lot of the hunting in Africa. So, Chad, this is a global hub. This isn't Utah. This isn't the West. This is the global hub of conservation. And the really cool thing then, when we need to do a habitat project down in Panguitch, or, transplant some elk down in San Juan County, or, put some mountain goats on the Dutton, or some bighorn sheep in the Santa Fe or the Escalante, then that just has given us a platform where we can go and make the case to land managers, politicians, elected officials, that, hey, this is great for all the tourists. They get to come see all this wildlife. It's great for the local economies. It's great it's win-win-win, so why not do it?
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
and the other thing I want to bring up, Chad, is this Hunt Expo's launched a lot of businesses. Phone Scopes, little teeny town of Beaver, Utah. Mm-hmm. Go to their booth and look how big that is. Christensen Arms, Fayette, Utah.
Oh yeah.
And I've shot geese in Fayette back when I was 14 years old. I mean, all these little teeny towns, it's created a lot of little businesses, and that's what hunters are. We're entrepreneurs.
I would like to talk about, I've been watching the series 1923, which is kind of the Yellowstone offshoot of I think it's 2 generations back. And the whole series so far has been based around a range war between two people who wanted to use the land, the cattlemen and the sheep. Didn't we almost really have a range war with the sportsmen and the cattlemen here 10 or 15 years ago of sorts, because of the limits to places and food and fodder and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Chad, one of my grandfathers was a cattleman, one was a sheepman, so I understand that range war. And then you throw sportsmen into the mix in the mid-'70s, and what was happening is because the environmentalists had stopped active land management, the land was becoming decadent, old, and instead of having 2,000 pounds of food an acre, you had 100 pounds of food an acre. So then they had to start cutting grazing permits and reducing livestock. So then if you have less livestock and you have more wildlife, then obviously there's a war. So everyone was in this lose, 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 and the answer was let's kill everything. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. I'm a Stephen R. Covey, win-win or no deal. And so we actually went in and, 2 million acres at 1,000 pounds more an acre, that's 2 billion pounds of food. So now you can have more elk, more cows, more sheep, more everything. And so that's how it's been a 30-year, it should be written up in a Harvard case study, win-win instead of win-lose. And so that was pretty dramatic. And the last thing, Chad, is, in addition to all these transplants we've talked about, moose, goat, sheep, bison, turkeys, is BYU's been doing some really interesting studies on deer survival. And the one last thing we need to do is we've treated, when I say we, that's DWR, Sportsman, BLM. On BLM lands, we've been able to treat almost 2 million acres. The Forest Service is a different agency, and we've not been able to get into the upper elevation. And so what needs to happen is there's been some work done called 106 reforestation. And they're able to go in and tear out all the dead pine trees and have aspen, forbs, browse, grasses come back. And that's what the studies are showing from BYU. The deer are not coming to the winter ranges in a good enough condition. So even though we fixed the winter range, the missing link now is to fix the summer range.
That's interesting you say that, because we did a similar conversation with Randy Julander, who used to be the snow survey guy, and he said the healthiest forests have lots of meadows in them.
Yes.
And clumps of trees for windbreaks. Is that kind of what this 106 process is about?
Well, Chad, any hunter knows when it snows or rains, you get under a pine tree. But if you look on a solid north-facing dark pine forest, any hunter knows there's not one blade of grass, not one piece of browse. And if you also go, you can go up there right now in this heavy snowstorm winter. There's no snow because the pine boughs capture the snow and it reaspirates the atmosphere. And so pine trees, we want some, but over time they take over the landscape. The best biodiversity, let me have the environmentalist clue in, the best biodiversity tree is the aspen. You have like 50 different plants. It's great for watershed. It doesn't burn. The leaves fall, so the snow actually gets into the groundwater, the aquifers, the streams. And so we've interrupted the natural process, so we need to take out pines and get more aspen. And that will help solve everything for everybody.
But this is a big scale problem. It's more than just the southeast Utah deer herd. It's more than just the Tavaputs. It's more than just these different ranges. This is a problem that goes from New Mexico all the way to the Canadian border.
Well, it is. It's the Colorado River watershed, and it affects the people in California, and it affects people that eat food. And so, what has to happen, Chad? There's data, and there just so people can understand. Back in the day, there used to be fires every, say, 20 years. Now we don't have them for 100 years. So instead of having 10 trees an acre, we have 200 trees an acre. Each one of those trees is a straw that sucks water. And so
an umbrella that repels
that repels the water.
Yeah.
So it's a 2x.
Yeah.
And so we need to go in and remove, kind of reestablish the natural cycle. We're part of that equation, and have less pine and more aspen, and we'll have a lot more water. I mean, Chad, we're talking 40 to 60% increased yield. I mean, we've seen places they've done the treatment, springs start flowing again, rivers start flowing again, and so it's a big deal.
Well, I believe that it is. I just wonder if we're able to mechanically do that, because if you tried to burn your way to health, our air quality would be shot.
Well, not only that, but these burns are crazy because you get out of touch and you just go, I mean, how many cabins are there in Utah now in the West? So fire's not the answer. Mechanical treatment's the answer. You can control it. You can do it cost effective, and that's what we need to do.
One last question. If you guys hadn't gotten together in was it 94?
94.
Okay. Where would we be today? What would sportsman, agriculture, cattle ranching look like in Utah?
Well, Chad, that's a $64 question, but if you were to put a gun to my head, here's what my answer would be. We probably wouldn't have any moose, mountain goats, bison, desert bighorn, Rocky Mountain bighorn. our deer herd probably would be gone. Tom Wharton of the Tribune said, hey, the deer herd's gone, can't do anything about it. Mike Welch, the big game biologist for the division, said, we can't because you can't fix the habitat. The Cattlemen and Farm Bureau wanted to kill off all the elk, and I understand why, because they were losing their livelihoods. It happened to my grandpa. So we probably wouldn't have very much. I mean, Tom Wharton said that we would have nothing, and now we've got thriving, and that's where I hope all the people will say, let's get involved. We can make a difference. We can make a change. And now it's a thriving $2.5 billion industry. And to give you an idea, Chad, everyone loves to fish. I think there's 1 million. We're up there right now getting $50 million to rebuild a fish hatchery down in Loa that's got the best water supply. That'll supply half the fish for every river and stream. So once again, we've made hunting a big business, fishing a big business. We can go up there and get $50 million. And 30 years ago, Chad, they'd have laughed you out the door if you asked for $5,000. It's quantum.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. I hope we can have a future discussion when there's more great news, because you certainly seem to be around it.
Well, we got a great team, and I do want to thank all the volunteers of Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, and they're just great guys, the state employees. So it's an awesome story.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for joining with us. Remember, we are going to try and have these conversations every week about the important issues that surround us here in the West, and it's your obligation to stay engaged, stay informed, and share your information with your friends that you learn here. We'll see you next week.